welcome as our first speaker, the Reverend James Victor Jr.
We would like to welcome the Committee of 100 to the Mount Olive Church. We are delighted that you've chosen to be with us tonight, and we hope that your presence is a delight and that in some way you experience the presence of God. Then we also welcome my fellow panelists for sharing. We thank them for coming from their various traditions so that we can have some good dialogue tonight. I am representing the Christian tradition, and as it relates to social activism and engagement within the Christian perspective. And I need to begin with a caveat because we can speak in such broad strokes that we think that there is a definitive Christian perspective. And as there is diversity among the panelists, there's also diversity within the Christian tradition. And so what I offer tonight is not the Christian theology of social engagement, but rather a theology of social engagement. As I study history, as I read the Bible, as I view theology, I think it is imperative for the church to be engaged in social activism. It's, from my theological perspective, it is intrinsic and inherent. It is at the focal point of the gospel. We often view salvation and other of those weighty theological terms in the New Testament on an individual level and on an individual basis. But when one really delves into the study of the book, you quickly discover that there is a corporate dimension that is so missing in our thinking about social activism and the well-being of fellow individuals on the planet. And so I think I'm coming from that particular perspective. As we look at different traditions within the Christian context for social activism, I think that there are three prominent perspectives that have guided the church throughout its mission and its different epochs. And in each of them, we've seen sometimes the church at its best, and at other times, we've seen the church at its worst. And a part of maturity, I think, is the ability for self-critique. And so what I have to say tonight will be a challenge to all of us, but it will be a challenge also within the church community. So in looking at the multiple ways of handling the topic of social activism, one way that the church has handled social activism is pacifism. That the church has relied on a theology that says we are not to engage in social activities, but rather that's the work of God, and so our responsibility is to pray, is to exercise other kinds of spiritual disciplines, but social activism is something for God to do in God's redeeming work. The other perspective is that of charity. And I think that within all Christian traditions, there is an element that is lifted up that says that the church should be a charitable organization, an institution, an organism, but also its individual members should be charitable people. Then there is also, I think, the prophetic tradition within the Christian context, which entails speaking truth to power and to insist on the justice for all adherents to the faith and even those outside of the faith. And justice is, as we understand it biblically from the New Testament and theologically from the New Testament, is radically different from what we consider jurisprudence. We often think justice in America is the punishment must fit the crime. But justice understood biblically, as Walter Brueggemann says, is finding out what belongs to whom and then returning it. which then has some underlying assumptions about it. And then there is another perspective that I think is not a Christian perspective, but it has been a perspective practiced by some Christians, and that is apathy and indifference, where there is just no concern for the least, no concern for justice. It's a Christianity that is pretty much one of self-absorption. And so in any of those perspectives, there are some assumptions that I'm operating from. One assumption is that God is still at work in the world doing something. Oftentimes that may be mysterious, cloudy. It's hard for us to, as adherents of the faith, to discern that. But God is at work doing something. And that something is always good and in our best interest. The second assumption is that there is an abiding hope. And hope is something that anchors us in this work of activism. Hope is radically different than optimism. Hope says that things are going to get better in spite of prevailing circumstances. Optimism says that things are going to get better because of prevailing circumstances. And the church ought to always have a hope, particularly since we are operating from the first assumption that God is at work doing something. And then the third assumption in any of these perspectives is that the Christian witness, individually and corporately, has a responsibility for our fellow man, for our fellows on the planet, and that we should all be actively engaged in ensuring the best life for all, whether they become Christians or not. Now, those are my operating assumptions. Those are not necessarily everybody in the church's operating assumptions. After all, I did give you a warning that I'm giving you a Christian theology and not the definitive Christian theology. We in Mount Olive, of course, are trying to live that out through our vision statement of being an inclusive community that's demonstrating love. You can see our banners on the wall, which reflect some of our core values. And so we are trying to live that out as a part of our Christian social responsibility. Now, I'll be the first to admit that not everyone does that, and not everyone in the church sees that as the way that the church should function. But we at Mount Olive are engaging in charitable acts. We have mentoring programs. We are gearing up for prison ministry. And so that's some of the ways in which we live this out and try to make the society a more just society. I think my time is about up, and I want to be respectful of my fellow presenters, so I'll yield the balance of my time to the next.
First, I'd like to give honor and glory to the Lord of all the worlds, God Almighty, who has brought us to this blessed place. I might also add that it is really wonderful to be in this house of worship. And this is really a beautiful house. Would you agree? Yes. And I also want to thank the Arlington Committee of 100. And it's been, I think, too long since we've been together. Many years ago, there was a dinner that we had together at the mosque, and it really was a wonderful evening, and so I'm really honored to be back with you again. I probably have to deviate from my notes for just a moment because on some level, as a person who grew up in Episcopalian, I don't know if I'm not a follower of Christ, or am I a better follower of Christ now? And perhaps you will see what I'm talking about through this short talk. Because it's my conception that God has sent guides as messengers throughout the millennia to provide a guidance and a divine wisdom and a prophetic voice to every generation. And that one God only has one fundamental message. And Jesus was asked that question, and he said that one guidance is to love God and to do right by your fellow man. It is really this sort of symbol that we have of the cross. There's a vertical axis, our relationship with God, and then the human axis, that relationship between one another. And so I draw my guidance from the Quran in the Arabic language, translated into its contemporary applications, but it speaks in the voices of the prophets that preceded. And therefore, although I am a follower of Muhammad, I'm also a follower of Jesus, I'm also a follower of Moses and David and Solomon and our father Abraham, and called upon to do the same things that they were called upon to do. Our analysis for today. Dr. King reminded us that we need to have a radical revolution of values. That our faith calls us, and the Quranic narrative repeats this phrase about 25 times. I don't know if any of you listen to rap here. Don't raise your hand. When rappers run out of words to say, they kind of repeat, because they got to figure out what they're going to say next. When God repeats something over and over in the book, in the scripture, it's because it's important. And so within the Islamic framework, the Quran repeats over and over again, Inna ladina amanu wa amilu salihat. Verily, those who have the right relationship with God and they follow with deeds of righteousness with their fellow man, they are the successful people. And so our paradigm is to say maybe what the Bible says, faith without works is dead. In Arabic, that would be Inna ladina amanu wa amilu salihat. So it is that we are called upon by this spiritual guidance to apply that belief, because the Prophet Muhammad said, you are not a believer unless you submit your will to the will of God. That would be an Arabic Muslim. And you are not submitted to God's will except that you want for your brother what you want for yourself. So when we're living in a community and we see that there are people who have needs, and we don't have those needs, our needs have been satisfied, that there's something wrong with our faith if we don't do something to correct that circumstance. How much time is it? 5 minutes. I'm 5 minutes and 33 seconds. How many minutes left? 7, 8? Okay, we're doing good. At the same time, a reminder that when you hear the Arabic word Sharia, meaning some kind of Islamic law, what they're really talking about in its real sense are the laws that God has made, and they're universal. Right? Don't kill, don't murder, don't steal, don't be an adulterer, don't covet your neighbor's belonging. These divine principles, they're part of our Sharia, along with keeping a kind of Muslim kosher. But there is something above that. Praying 5 times a day and fasting in Ramadan. There's something above that, and this is a term you won't hear in the media. It's called maqasid al-sharia. It is the objectives of the law. Because sometimes, just going by the letter of the law, you miss the spirit of the law. And so for us, we need to look at what are the objectives that God wants to prevail, and then for us to create the kind of framework so that that way of life can exist. I'm going to say something bad in a minute. I'm waiting until we get the cutoff time. So, the words Rahman are repeated over and over in the Quran. Mercy, adl, justice, mawaddah, love, and taqwa, to have God consciousness. Let me read something from the Quran that might close us out. It says, God bears witness that there is none worthy of worship except God alone, and that the angels and those that possess knowledge and maintain the Creator's justice, that there is no God but Him, that God is the wise and the mighty. There is this relationship between our witness before God and our actions on this earth. Let me close. What is the mosque doing to live out these things? We have an emergency housing assistance program because the price of property in this area is moving some people out. Amen? Some people who used to live around this church can't live around here anymore. Right? We have a weekly food bank because the price of food is going up faster than the salaries of poor people and working people. We do a summer lunch program because when schools are closed, children who are in this community, over 100,000 people, Fairfax County, go hungry every day. And so we have a lunch program during the summer when school is out. We have a hypothermia program in the wintertime because during the coldest months of the year, we bring women who are homeless into the mosque to spend the night because there's no shelter for them. We do immigration advocacy. Some of our people have been harassed for 13 or 14 years while trying to apply legally for their citizenship. And always because their name is John Smith in Arabic, they're always confused with somebody else and winding up down in Norfolk. In the immigration jail, we got to raise money to get them out. I'm going to close. I saw the wrap-up sign. Try to behave myself.
You didn't say that.
I'm getting ready to tell you now. God has declared war on interest. Usury is not permitted in the Old Testament, am I right? Usury. Be ye lender nor borrower. The Quran says that Allah has declared war on usury. And what's happening in our country now is that the bankers who used to safeguard our money have now become gamblers with our money. And Occupy Wall Street, they're in the wrong end of the dog. Because the laws are made across the river to allow the casino operators now to become Bank of America. You can name names, Chase, JP Morgan, you can name any of them. That we have an obligation as faith communities to join together to establish what is right and to prohibit what is wrong. I'm going to close with Micah to say what? What does the Lord require? To love, to do justice. To love what? And to walk humbly with our God. That is an Islamic tradition. It is a Christian tradition. It is a Jewish tradition. And we have an obligation now to stand up together as a community, because individuals won't be able to do it alone. And I think that is the crux of why we have this divide. Because all of us have been called to do the same thing. Just we've been unsuccessful trying to do it alone. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we're probably probably competing, all of us, for the hardest words to pronounce and names to pronounce in the Bible. Thank you, Reverend Victor. Thank you, the Arlington Committee of 100. And it's really great and an honor to hear all of these different perspectives. I do feel like, of course, as we all knew would happen, all of us are really speaking the same truths and perhaps just using different traditions and different ways of saying it. And I was writing a couple of those thoughts down as I was listening to both Reverend Victor and Imam Malik. So I don't know where to start now, to start with what I had prepared or to respond. I guess I will start with this idea. You spoke, Imam, about the repetition in tradition and how it's such an important part of emphasizing the most crucial parts of what your tradition teaches. And I really feel that resonates in Jewish tradition. Of course, there are many things that are repeated in Jewish tradition over and over again as we pray 3 times a day, and as we celebrate holidays, etc. One of the greatest things that's repeated all of the time, week after week and day after day, is to remember the Exodus from Egypt. And I think that is a central part of what makes Jews who they are, and also what guides Jews towards social justice work. Because it's in remembering, even if it's a collective memory from thousands of years ago, remembering the experience of being slaves, that helps us to have, hopefully, this is the hope, that helps us to have an empathy that will lead us to work towards the freedom of everyone around the world, and especially those closest to us. There is a wonderful story that I think demonstrates the centrality of the way we treat other people to Jewish tradition. So I'm going to tell that story quickly. There were 2 rabbis, great rabbis of Talmudic times, Rabbi Hillel and Rabbi Shammai. They always argue with each other over issues of law, and Rabbi Hillel always seems to win. And there was a person who was not Jewish, who went to the door of Rabbi Shammai and knocked on the door and said, "Rabbi, I want to convert, I want to become a Jew, but I'll only do so if you can teach me Torah on 1 foot." And Rabbi Shammai was a carpenter. He had a hammer in his hand, and he chased the person away. Same person went to Rabbi Hillel's door, who was always known in these disputes between Hillel and Shammai being the more soft, the more lenient person. Asks the same question of Rabbi Hillel. "I'll convert and be Jewish if you can teach me Torah while standing on 1 foot." And Rabbi Hillel responds, he goes on 1 foot, and he says, "What is hateful to you, do not do to your neighbor." That is Torah. The rest is commentary. Go and learn. So, of course, he does slip it in there. You still got to learn all the Torah. But this has been taken up also by Rabbi Akiva and by many of the rabbis of the Talmud as the central commandment of Torah, which is just a slightly different way of saying what is often said, I know, in Christian and Muslim traditions. Treat others the way you would want them to treat you. And Rabbi Hillel just puts a slightly different twist on it. Don't treat others the way you would not have them do to you. Perhaps as a way of beginning, and perhaps we don't know right away how one would want to be treated, and we need to be careful not to violate what they would need. There are many, many texts that lead us towards justice in Judaism. And so I think I'll point first, since I might run out of time, to what I think is probably more important and more central of a set of laws than the 10 Commandments to Judaism, even though the commandments are crucial to have as a basis. But there's a passage called the Holiness Code in the book of Leviticus that contains the verse, a fairly famous verse, "You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." And then proceeds to explain what it means to be holy by giving a list of commandments. And those are, many of those are commandments of social justice. You must pay your worker your day labor on the same day. when you loan a person money, there was a pledge in those times that if you loaned somebody money, you received a pledge that you would keep and give back when you were repaid. And there are laws in that code about how you're supposed to treat this person who's giving you the pledge. You're not supposed to follow them into their house to get the pledge, because this is a violation of their privacy and can be humiliating to them. There are numerous commandments in that passage that call on us to look to the needs of the stranger, the orphan, and the widow, and the blind. So these are texts which we look to all the time in Judaism to help guide us towards caring for a diverse set of people, people who are not like us, people who don't live among us, people who may be disabled, people who are in some way underdogs and need help. And I also want to point back at Imam Malik when he spoke about the spirit of the law, and read another passage that may be familiar from the book of Isaiah. Because this is, every religious tradition has its rituals and its ethical commandments. And Imam, I think as you were saying, the goal of both is to guide us towards doing what is right and caring for others. But it's possible to be so tied up in the rituals that you forget what the point is. You forget the spirit of those laws. And so we read on Yom Kippur, which is our holiest day, our Day of Atonement each year, we just had it a few weeks ago. We read these words. Is this the fast I desire? A day for men to starve their bodies? Is it bowing the head like a bulrush and lying in sackcloth and ashes? Do you call that a fast? A day when the Lord is favorable? No. This is the fast I desire, to unlock fetters of wickedness and untie the cords of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, to break off every yoke. It is to share your bread with the hungry, and to take the wretched poor into your home. When you see the naked, to clothe him, and not to ignore your own kin. So, how much time do I have? 1 minute. Okay. Well, we at Temple Rodef Shalom do have, many programs, and we always want to be doing more too. We have soup caravans, and we have days when we come together to help in building, to do reparations in people's homes who are unable to do it themselves. Many programs like that, and we need to do more. And we're also, right now, trying to make headway in some other areas, most especially in organizing ourselves around what changes we would like to see, even beyond the crucial areas of community service and delivering services to those who are in need in the moment. But what goals of social change can we unite around as a congregation? And we're also part of an organization of congregations in Northern Virginia called Virginians Organized for Interfaith Community Engagement, which is VOICE, which tries to do the same thing with many congregations together. And I know that I'm not the only congregation who's a part of that today. So we hope that this will be a new direction for us in social justice work, which will attack some of the systemic problems in our system and in our society, in addition to the service work that we're doing now.
Thank you, Link, and thank you, Jim, and thank you to all of the members of the Arlington Committee of 100. It's great to be on this panel and included in this conversation. I'm one of 3 ministers serving at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington, along with the Reverend Michael McGee and the Reverend Dr. Linda Olson-Peebles. Just looking at the composition of our panel, I want to give a shout out to all of the lay women and all of the clergy women who do a tremendous work and who make a lot of the social justice work that we do in our context possible, so thank you very much for that. I'm the minister at the congregation who's primarily responsible for the areas of social justice, denominational connections, and membership. And what I can say about our social justice program at UUCA is that there is, in fact, so much going on that I, who lead the program, hardly know what's going on most of the time. Just try to keep a little bit ahead of the curve and try to help guide the energy a little bit. So if you were to ask each person about, within Unitarian Universalism, about why they do what you do, you get something of a different answer, I think. And similar to what Reverend Victor was saying, I would in no way attempt to speak on behalf of all Unitarian Universalists. It's such a diverse group of people. But I would say that I believe that many of them would concur with me when I would say that we as Unitarian Universalists believe in the power of love to transform the world. What I will offer you as well in terms of understanding a bit about the Unitarian Universalist tradition are our 7 principles, which are in no way a creed, but our General Assembly, which gathers every year, approved these principles some years ago, and we have them as touchstones as we go about the work that we do in the world. So as Unitarian Universalist congregations, we covenant to affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person, justice, equity, and compassion in human relations, acceptance of one another, and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process within our congregations and in society at large, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all, and respect for the interdependent web of all existence of which we are a part. And I have to say that when I was coming out of seminary and in somewhat of a theological and denominational limbo, I went to a congregation and saw those 7 principles, and I said, you know what, that's what I believe. Maybe, just maybe, that's where I belong. So as Unitarian Universalists, I'd say that we believe one of our slogans that you might hear in a Unitarian Universalist context is deeds, not creeds. So that's to say that we believe we work out what we believe in real time and how we treat other people, how we care for our planet, rather than some belief in the existence of God or the nature of God or what happens once we're on the other side of this earthly life that we know. So much of our inspiration, I would say, comes from figures in human history. And of course, as Unitarian Universalists, we have the ability to look outside our own tradition for inspiration and understanding, and within it as well. Tonight, I'm particularly aware, as I think about it, of 2 of our martyrs within Unitarian Universalism, James Reed and Viola Liuzzo, who went down to Selma during the Civil Rights era and both lost their lives. James Reed was basically bludgeoned to death in Alabama, and Viola Liuzzo was shot as she was transporting some African Americans during that struggle. Now, they heard the call to be of service, and they answered it. And because they answered it, they lost their lives. But it does say something about the nature of Unitarian Universalism, I would say, that people hear the call, and whether or not their lives are at risk or not, they choose to go out and make a difference somehow, take their lives and put it to use for the good of the world. Within our tradition, and also I think what I want to do with the balance of my time as much as possible is focus on some of the things that we've done, particularly at the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington. And there are several members of the congregation who are here tonight. So when we get to the question and answer session, because they've been here much longer than I have, they can correct me and make adjustments if I get anything wrong. One of the things that is most significant about the Unitarian Universalist Church of Arlington is that it is the place that Culpeper Garden, the senior center here in Arlington, got its start back in the 1960s and 1970s. And it started because a couple of members of the congregation became aware of the lack of housing for seniors in the Southeast. And from that, they came back and they had a conversation with the minister, Reverend Redmond, and he gave I think I'd say for lack of a better term, a come to Jesus type sermon, where he really held their feet to the fire and said, no, you need to do this. You need to make a commitment, make a choice about addressing this issue of senior housing. And so from that, one of the members went and figured out a way to form a housing corporation and actively worked with county and federal agencies to be able to bring about the establishment of Culpeper Garden, which is something that we hold up with great pride when we think about the social justice work that's happened in the congregation. But it started, like so many things do, with the inspiration of people such as yourselves, people gathered here, having an idea and an inspiration and sharing it and inspiring us as clergy to be able to go out and lead and help make a difference. So very pleased to be associated with that. And I would put in a plug also that Culpeper Garden is having a fundraiser at the Signature Theater this Monday night. I think you can still get a ticket. It's a wonderful event. Some of the inspiration for our work comes from our larger denomination. In 2010, there was a great debate at our General Assembly. We were in Minnesota at the time. We have to schedule our General Assembly some years in advance because you have to arrange for hotels and such. And the General Assembly for 2012 was scheduled to be held in Phoenix, Arizona. And of course, right at that time, the state had passed these very stringent anti-illegal immigrant laws. And so the question was, are the Unitarian Universalists going to boycott Arizona, or are we going to go and stand in solidarity with people working for change and justice? And the vote was, we're going to go and stand in solidarity by the invitation of people working there for the same causes we believe in. So from that, it came to be that immigration as a moral issue was, 1 minute already? Immigration as a moral issue became a focal point of our work. And so from that, we've been able to do some work with people locally for the Martin Luther King Jr. service that I led at our congregation this past year. I took it as an opportunity to build a link between the dream of the dreamers, the young people who would benefit from the DREAM Act, for those of you who might not know it, it would allow a path for citizenship for young people who were brought to this country as minors by their parents through military service or going to college. And we've been able to build and strengthen that relationship over that course of time as well. We're also aware of, in our congregation, of our limitations, and so because we don't have a soup kitchen or wonderful food program that operates out of our church itself, we believe that we support financially, we're committed to supporting financially our local food assistance project, the Arlington Food Assistance Center, as well as the Arlington Street People's Assistance Network. Now that I have 30 seconds left, I think I'll just go to the end and we can catch up on some of these comments. Voice has already been mentioned as something that we're very involved in as well. I'll leave you with the lyrics of one of my favorite hymns in our Unitarian Universalist hymnal, Singing the Living Tradition, and those are these. Life is the greatest gift of all, the riches of this earth. Life and its creatures, great and small, of high and lowly birth. So treasure it and measure it with deeds of shining worth. Amen. Thank you.
So raise your hand, I'll acknowledge you back.
I'm a member of this church right here. I just wanted to know each of your opinions on dating or relationships between faiths, because I see, as one person, I see a lot of my friends and colleagues are dating or even think about marriage, going into marriage and relationships between different faiths.
In our Unitarian Universalist tradition, it's the case that couples such as the one that you would describe would seek out our congregation because it's a place where people have been able to come together across different faith traditions, and because there is no creed that bars people from admission, that it's a place where a number of people have found a home, whether it's a couple that is a same-sex couple, or it's a couple that's coming from different religious traditions or different ethnic backgrounds. In our tradition, we believe in justice, equity, and compassion, and for that reason, we would welcome that, and think it just makes for a more interesting mix.
In our congregation, there are weddings that happen within our community and at the temple between Jews and non-Jews. A very significant percentage or number of families in our community include a non-Jew and a Jew. The parents, one Jew, one non-Jew. And at the same time, our goal is that within that community and in marriages that are created in our temple, is that while including all faith traditions that are represented in the family, we're able to give a Jewish, to provide a Jewish context for our religious observances within the temple and within the family. Because we believe that no matter what the faith is, whether it's Christian, Muslim, Universalist, and all of them would be equally good, that there's a value in creating a unified and singular faith tradition within a family.
I think people find love wherever they find it. But my recommendation would be that there's some serious counseling so that individuals can understand their differences and that they are equipped to handle those differences, whether they be cultural, ethnic, or religious, as they enter into the relationship.
Okay, next person.
I think the only thing I can say in the interest of time is that, amen. The young man who asked the question, sometimes it's helpful to know more about what the real issue is. I'm in a congregation that has about 37 different language groups. So people who come from all different kinds of backgrounds and understandings and orientations. And I think the pastor said, well, when young people want to get together, and I think whenever you want to get married, you always feel young, no matter how old you are. There should be some counsel about what kind of life do we want to live? What are our values and our goals? And if those things can be made clear, and maybe they're rooted in one understanding of the faith or another, but there ought to be some clear discussion, not about the romance component, but about how are we going to live our lives. If we're going to have children, how are we going to manage it? How do we raise them with this plurality? Is it going to become a conflict around faith, or are we going to provide them the best from our faith understanding? And so for me, I think it would be good if that couple could find a community that they could be rooted in, that accepts the reality of their plurality, and then supports their growth and development. And I think that is the central issue. And I think you can probably find that in all of these. And at the same time, I think, with the exception of Carlton, there's going to be a certain particular grounding if I'm at the synagogue, or grounding if I'm at the church. And so you have to bear those into considerations too. That even though we're open, any one of the institutions you go to, with the exception of it's going to be grounded in a particular theological framework.
But there's still a ground.
I mean, you have a ground, yes.
Hi, my name is Jim Schroeder. I wanted to ask, we know that talking on the local level now, that there are government agencies that deal with the needy, there are churches, obviously, there are nonprofits, there are individuals. How do all of these groups work together in our local area here? Is there a lot of cooperation?
I'll take a quick stab. First, I had the privilege of sitting with George Bush one day, who shared that with his drinking problem, wasn't a government program that helped them transition. It was the sort of value-added piece that comes from the program along with that extra something that you get in a faith community, where people are serving not because they're serving you, but because they're serving something greater. If you're in, I can take most communities, look at the voice framework, where you have a group of congregations that get together and identify some common project, and they work on that together. Right now, we have one of our voice partners, the First Christian Church. They serve lunch during the day as a hypothermia program, and we house those women at night. So that's a very local kind of community connection that we've made, recognizing that this social safety net needs all of us to pick up the part. They said, we can't do the overnight because we don't have the staff. The mosque said, no problem. We're there until an hour after dusk, and we come in an hour before sunrise, so we can handle it. There also is a framework in Fairfax County, is a thing called Faith Communities in Action, which is the county connected with faith communities to identify how we can better advise the government as people who provide services on the ground, and they in turn have a communication network so that they can get the word out about programs and activities and so on. So, I mean, there are many different layers of this interaction that exists now. Some counties do it better than others, but there is a kind of framework in which we do work together, whether it's individual congregations, collective congregations, or between the congregations and the government itself.
A particular example that I would offer from the perspective of voice and what's happening here, what has happened here in Arlington, would be to say a word about an action that involves some members of our congregation at UUCA. And that was this, is that when the Department of Human Services for the county relocated to Washington Boulevard, away from Clarendon, it actually was a disadvantage for citizens on Western Columbia Pike, who up to that point had a direct bus line that would take them to DHS for medical treatment and other services. But when the department, DHS moved, it put those folks at a disadvantage, so that in the heat of the summer or in the winter, they would be standing out waiting to change buses, sometimes with children or sometimes elderly people, and this was just a situation that wouldn't work. So Voice went out into the community and discovered this need and brought it to the attention of our county board. And because of that, there was a new bus line was rerouted so that it would go directly from Western Columbia Pike to DHS. And so that is the kind of collaboration that I would hope for, that we as congregations, we as faith organizations, we as private citizens are working together to mobilize people in local communities, bring it to the attention of our government, and hold them accountable for making systems that work for everyone, and especially the most vulnerable and the least advantaged among us.
Yeah, it happens on many different levels, and I would just add a couple of examples. Very recently, there was a program, or there is an ongoing program called Stop Hunger Now, which makes hundreds of thousands of meals for hungry people around the world. That includes many different churches in the area and synagogues and mosques as well. Yes, I believe so. I also, Carlton, I don't know if you were working with any other churches or synagogues or mosques in the area when you guys created the what was it called? The garden.
Oh,
Culpepper Garden. But Temple Road of Shalom, and this goes back a few years before I came here, but I believe it was with Lewinsville Presbyterian Church that Road of Shalom came together with them and some other groups in the area to create Chesterbrook Residences, which is a affordable housing or lower and middle income facility for aging residents, which is another wonderful. So there's so many advocacy, working together to create new programs, and just coming together to deliver services.
And I think also, as faith communities, we have a responsibility to raise the prophetic voice to decision makers to move beyond social services to social transformation.
There you go.
And that entails collaboration, because no one faith community can do this by itself. It has to be done in partnership with people with similar values. Even though we come from different faith traditions, you can hear the resonances in all of our traditions that make a prophetic witness a moral mandate. And I think that's one of the things that is a challenge for all of us now, because all of us do charitable work, but we've got to become more proactive, more courageous to get to the part of social engineering and social transformation.
That's right.
Well, we sadly come to the end of our available time this evening. I want to remind you that the Committee 100 meets every second Wednesday of the year except July and August, almost always at Marymount University for dinner and a lively discussion similar to what we've had this evening.